Have you ever been alone in your room late at night and felt the air change, almost as if something unseen had crossed the threshold? Maybe you brushed it off as your imagination or the flickering streetlight outside. But what if it wasn't? What if the last shadow in your room didn't belong to you? And whatever you do, you must not turn around. Tonight, we dive into a disturbing story that blurs the thin line between what you see and what's watching you when you think you're alone. It started 2 weeks ago when Anna moved into the small, musty apartment on the edge of town. She was chasing a fresh start, desperate to leave behind the crumbling relationship and suffocating memories that haunted her. The building was old, ancient really, with creaky wooden floors and walls so thin you could hear your neighbors whisper. But it was cheap, and that was all Anna could afford. The first night was uneventful, aside from the oppressive stillness that clung to the air. It was almost too quiet, broken only by the occasional groan of the settling building. Anna had shrugged it off, blaming her nerves and exhaustion. She unpacked a few essentials, curled up in bed, and fell into a restless sleep. It was around 2:47 a.m. when she first noticed it, the faint creaking of the bedroom door being nudged open. Half asleep, Anna lifted her head just enough to squint toward the doorway. Nothing there, just shadows cast by the dim streetlight outside. Still, she felt uneasy. It was the kind of unease that rooted itself deep in your bones, that made the back of your neck prickle. Pulling the blanket up to her chin, she told herself it was nothing. But the feeling didn't leave. If anything, it grew heavier, like a presence settling into the corner of her room. Anna didn't turn on the light. She was too tired, too dismissive of her instincts. She just squeezed her eyes shut and tried to will herself back to sleep. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Sunlight poured through the thin curtains, chasing away the fears of the night. She laughed at herself while making coffee, blaming the stress of moving and loneliness for her wild imagination. That evening, Anna was FaceTiming her sister, Lauren, when she mentioned the odd incident. "You sure it's not just the old building noises?" Lauren asked, half concerned, half smirking. "Probably," Anna admitted, but her voice was tight, betraying a gnawing anxiety she couldn't quite explain. They chatted a bit longer, and Anna, feeling foolish, let it go. She busied herself the rest of the evening with setting up her shelves, organizing her books, and trying to make the space feel more like home. By the time she collapsed into bed, her eyelids were heavy and she drifted off almost immediately. The second occurrence was unmistakable. Anna woke again to the soft creaking of the door, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Breathing. Slow, shallow breathing, so faint it almost blended with the sighing of the old walls. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she forced herself to lie perfectly still. She dared a glance toward the door. It was ajar, just a few inches, but enough to see the dim outline of the hallway beyond. Empty. Yet, when Anna turned her head ever so slightly to scan the room, her breath caught in her throat. A shadow, near the far corner, opposite her bed. At first, she thought it might be a trick of the light, but this shadow was darker, heavier, almost solid. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, it just loomed. And that's when she remembered something, a stupid childhood fear that her grandmother used to warn her about. If you ever see an extra shadow in your room, don't turn your back to it. Don't look directly at it. And whatever you do, don't turn around. Anna clutched her blanket tighter, heart pounding so loudly she thought she might pass out. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispering desperate prayers under her breath. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The air grew colder, the breathing louder. At some point, she drifted into a fitful, shallow sleep, waking up to the pale light of dawn. The shadow was gone. Her door stood open wider than before, as if someone, or something, had slipped out just before she woke. Anna was rattled, but she still tried to rationalize it. Sleep paralysis, she told herself. That had to be it. She was exhausted, stressed, and her mind was playing cruel tricks on her. She bought a cheap nightlight that afternoon, thinking a little more illumination would solve everything. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the windows set her nerves on edge. She slept with the light on, phone clutched tightly in her hand, but it didn't help. Because the shadow came back, and this time it was closer. They say shadows are cast by something real, solid, tangible, a body blocking the light. But what if one shadow in your room doesn't belong to anything you can see? What if you've been living with something that only shows itself when the lights go low, when you're too tired to notice, until it's too late? Tonight's story is about a young man who thought he was alone in his apartment, until he realized one shadow always lingered just a second too long. If you think the darkness in your room is harmless, you might want to keep the lights on for this one. Logan moved into his new apartment at the end of October. It was a top-floor unit in an old building just outside the city, a quiet place with creaky floorboards, thin walls, and a single window that stared out into an alley. He liked the stillness. After the chaos of the past few months, his breakup, the layoff, the insomnia, it felt like a place where he could finally breathe. He unpacked slowly, tossing boxes into corners, barely hanging anything on the walls. Most nights he'd stay up late, watching horror movies on his laptop, trying to tire himself out enough to sleep. But sleep rarely came easily. It started small, just a flicker in the corner of his eye, a brief movement on the wall opposite his bed when he rolled over. He assumed it was the passing headlights from the alley, until he realized the alley was too narrow for cars. Then came the dreams, claustrophobic, silent nightmares where he was pinned down in bed, eyes wide open, unable to scream while something watched him from the foot of the mattress. One night, he noticed it clearly. It was around 2:30 a.m. Logan had just turned off the lights and rolled over, facing the wall. The soft glow of the street lamp outside spilled in through the blinds, just enough to paint faint silhouettes in his room. He closed his eyes, already drifting, when he noticed something strange, an extra shape in the room. He turned back over. His heart lurched. On the far side of the room, just beyond the reach of the streetlight, a tall, slender shadow stretched from floor to ceiling. It wasn't shaped like anything in the room, too narrow to be his coat rack, too tall to be his bookshelf. It was motionless, but it felt aware. He froze, breath hitching. Just the lighting, he whispered to himself. Just tired. But the next night it was there again. And the night after. It always stood in the same spot, diagonal from his bed, facing him, cloaked in stillness. He tried different angles of light, rearranged furniture, even left a lamp on for comfort. But no matter what he did, the shadow persisted. Worse, it began to move, only when he wasn't watching. Logan started placing objects near it, small things like books or a lamp, trying to convince himself that the shadow must be part of some mundane explanation. But each time the shadow avoided them. If he left a chair where it usually stood, it would simply shift its location to another corner of the room, but never disappear. Soon he couldn't fall asleep without knowing where it was. He'd lie in bed with the blankets clutched around his shoulders, scanning the walls, watching the dark for any subtle shift. One night, after several sleepless hours, he broke. He set up his phone to record. Just a simple time-lapse on his nightstand. He aimed the camera toward the corner where the shadow always stood. He figured he'd either catch proof or expose the whole thing as a trick of the eye. The next morning he reviewed the footage. For most of the night, nothing happened, just the slow creep of light and shadow as cars passed in the distance. But at exactly 3:14 a.m., the footage glitched, just a second of static. When the picture returned, the shadow was gone. Then, frame by frame, Logan watched as a long black shape crawled across the ceiling toward his bed. No sound, no disturbance. Just the horrifying slither of a living shadow as it clung to the plaster and inched closer. The final frame before the battery died showed something inches from his face. Logan stared at the screen for hours. He didn't move, didn't speak. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the couch with all the lights on, door locked, phone in hand. Every hour he glanced toward the hallway, to his dark bedroom beyond. He wanted to leave, but something told him he couldn't. Like if he left the apartment, the shadow would follow. By the time dawn came, he had made up his mind. He would confront it. He walked into his room, curtains open wide, sunshine flooding in. The shadow was gone. Just an empty room, silent and still, until he turned around and saw it cast across the floor behind him, but nothing was there to cast it. It always starts the same way, a flicker of movement in the corner of your eye. You turn, expecting something, anything, but there's nothing. Just your quiet room, just your things, just your familiar, safe space. But it isn't safe anymore, because that last shadow lingering in the corner isn't yours. And whatever you do, don't turn around. When Erin first moved into her new apartment, she loved how quiet it was. A small one-bedroom on the top floor of a decaying Victorian complex, tucked just outside the city. It was the kind of place she could finally call her own. A place to breathe, write, heal. At first, it was just creaks, the kind of sounds that come from old buildings with thin walls and wooden beams. She told herself that. She told herself a lot of things. One night, around 3:17 a.m., she woke up from a dream she couldn't remember. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the dark, lit only by the dull glow of a street lamp through the thin curtain. That's when she saw it. A shadow, long and narrow, cast across her bedroom floor. But here's the thing. There was no one standing near the light. No one moving. Just her. And the shape wasn't right. Too tall, the head too crooked, its arms too long. She blinked and it was gone. The next day, she laughed it off, told herself it must have been her coat draped over the chair or the edge of the bookcase. But that night, she double-checked everything before going to sleep. Cleared the floor, shut the closet, no coat on the chair, no tricks of the light. Still, around the same time, 3:17 a.m., she woke again. This time, she didn't open her eyes right away. She could feel it, the pressure in the room. Like someone else was there, breathing, watching. When she finally looked, the shadow was there again, closer. It stretched from the wall by the dresser, long and unnatural. It didn't twitch or move like a tree's shadow might. It just stood there, a presence without a body. No noise, no air, just wait. She stared at it, frozen in bed, until morning. But when the sun rose and poured into the room, the shadow melted like smoke, as if it had never been there. Erin started staying up later, watching movies, scrolling through her phone, trying to ignore the clock as it ticked toward that cursed hour. But something changed. She began to see the shadow in places it didn't belong during the day. In the bathroom mirror behind her, in the hallway just after she turned her head, a flicker in the TV screen when it was off. Always a second too slow to catch, but real enough to make her heart pound. She called her mom, told her she thought she was having night terrors again, like when she was a kid. But her mom was quiet for a long moment. "You used to say there was someone in your room," her mom said finally. "You don't remember?" Erin didn't. She couldn't. "You used to say, the shadow won't let me sleep." Her mom's voice trembled slightly. "That's why we moved out of that old house." A week passed. Erin barely slept. Her eyes were sunken, her thoughts foggy. But every night the same moment arrived, 3:17 a.m., and with it, the shadow. But now, it moved. That night she watched as it slithered silently from the corner to the center of her room. No footsteps, no sound, just darkness stretching across the floor like spilled ink until it reached the foot of her bed. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to move. She lay paralyzed beneath the weight of invisible eyes, and then it spoke. Not in words exactly, but a voice formed in her mind, a whisper like dry leaves dragging across pavement. She didn't. She couldn't. The air grew cold and something leaned close enough to hear her breath catch. In the morning she found bruises on her arms, long finger-shaped bruises, as if something had gripped her in the night. That's when she knew. It wasn't just a shadow, it was attached to her, following her, feeding off her fear. She tried everything. Salt by the windows, burning sage. She even slept with the lights on, but it didn't matter. It always came, and every night it got closer. One night, desperate and exhausted, she placed a camera on her dresser, a cheap motion-detecting webcam. She didn't want to see, but she had to know. The footage was worse than she imagined. Around 3:16 a.m., the screen flickered. The room dimmed, though the lamp by her bed was still on, and then from the corner something shifted. A shape, not quite human, unfurled from the wall. It had no eyes, but it looked at her. It hovered over her sleeping form, leaned down, and whispered something she couldn't hear. The light bulb dimmed to a sickly orange. Her body twitched, and then, as if it heard the camera, it turned, straight into the lens. Its face, if it could be called that, was just a blur of shadow. But it smiled. The screen went black. Now Erin doesn't sleep at night. She keeps the lights on.